My name is Elena, and my grandmother Martha is the reason I became who I am. She raised me when no one else would. She's not just family to me, she's the safest place I've ever known. I noticed the bruises one Sunday afternoon. I was brushing Martha's hair in the kitchen, just like we always did after lunch, when I saw a dark purple blotch peeking from under her sleeve. I asked her about it, trying to keep my voice steady, and she just smiled like she always does and said she must have bumped into the coffee table again. I didn't believe her. Not really. I wanted to because that would be easier than thinking something might be wrong. But when I rolled up her sleeve gently, I saw more bruises, new ones, some older and yellowing. They were in places that didn't make sense. I asked again, softly this time, and she brushed it off with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. It's the way she avoided my gaze that stuck with me later that night. The way her voice tightened just for a second before she caught herself and smiled. It wasn't just the bruises. It was how she moved slower lately, how she flinched slightly when the door creaked open, how she seemed to always be apologizing for nothing. I told myself maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just her age. Maybe it was just bad luck or clumsiness. But something didn't feel right. I've known my grandma my whole life. She raised me. I've seen her face heartbreak and sickness, and she still walks with her chin up. But this was different. She looked smaller, diminished. That night I stayed longer than usual. I pretended I forgot my scarf and waited outside in my car, just sitting there in the dark engine off. Nothing happened. The house was quiet, the porch light humming softly. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my chest that something was hiding in that silence, something I wasn't supposed to see. The next morning, I brought her groceries and casually asked about Linda, the caregiver. She said Linda was lovely, always on time, and very helpful. But the way she said it was too perfect, too rehearsed. Like she was telling me what she thought I wanted to hear. I noticed her hand shaking as she picked up the carton of eggs, and for a second she looked so tired I almost cried. I went home that afternoon and took out the small security camera I had bought last year for a journalism project. I remember holding it in my hand and feeling like I was crossing a line. But I also remember the image of her arms. That was enough. I charged the device, tested it twice, then sat in my apartment staring at it for a full hour before packing it up in my purse. The next day, I told Grandma I'd be staying for dinner. She smiled, and I swear her shoulders relaxed just a little. I helped her prep the roast and pour the tea, and after she went to lie down, I slipped quietly into her bedroom. I knew every inch of that space. I'd built blanket forts there when I was 5. Now I was hiding a camera near the bookshelf where no one would notice. My hands trembled as I adjusted the angle. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm invading her privacy for nothing? But then I remembered the look in her eyes when I asked about the bruises. There was fear in them. I'd never seen that before. I knew I had to do this. When I walked out, I kissed her forehead and told her to rest. She smiled again, soft and tired, and thanked me for always visiting. I walked to the door, my heart pounding. I looked back one last time, and she had already closed her eyes. For a moment, I felt like I was betraying her. Then I reminded myself, if there's nothing wrong, no one ever has to know. But if there is, I need to be the one who finds out. She deserves that. She gave me everything when I had no one. Now it's my turn to protect her. No matter what I discover, I won't look away. I'm ready to face whatever truth is hiding in that house. And I'll make sure she never has to feel scared again. My grandmother Martha raised me from the time I was 4. After my mum died in a car accident, everything around me fell apart. But she never let me feel the weight of it. She wrapped me in her arms the night of the funeral and whispered that she would never let me feel alone again, and she kept that promise every single day. She worked 2 jobs well into her 60s just to make sure I had everything I needed. There were nights when I'd hear her come in past midnight, shoes dragging hands stiff from cleaning offices all day. But no matter how tired she was, she'd always sneak into my room, tuck in my blanket, and kiss the top of my head like she had all the energy in the world. She packed my lunches with little notes in them notes that said things like, "You're stronger than you think," or "I'm proud of you," even if I got a C in math. She showed up to every school event, sometimes still in her cleaning uniform, and she always clapped the loudest. I didn't notice back then how worn her hands looked, or how often she'd stretch her back after standing too long. I just thought she was invincible. As I grew older, I started to realize all the things she had given up. She never dated again after Grandpa died. She never went on vacations or bought things for herself. Every dollar she saved went to my education. I remember asking her once why she never complained. She looked at me and said, "Loving you gave me purpose. I didn't need anything else." When I got into college, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. I thought it was because she was proud, and I know she was. But now I think part of her was just tired. She'd spent 2 decades holding everything together for me. Once I moved out, I called her every day, but something about leaving made me feel like I was slowly pulling away from the one person who had always been my anchor. Over the years, she aged quickly. Her hair turned silver, her walk slowed, and her memory started to slip now and then. But even when her joints ached, or she forgot where she left her keys, she never lost that gentle smile when she saw me walk through the door. That's why seeing those bruises shook me so hard. That's why something inside me refused to let it go. At first I thought maybe she really was just falling more often. Age does that. But the bruises were in strange places. Upper arms, lower back, once. Even a faint mark near her collarbone. I tried not to let my mind go to dark places, but the more I tried to reason it away, the more unsettled I felt. And there was something else too. Her behavior. She was quieter now, more withdrawn. She'd look over her shoulder when she thought no one was watching. She flinched once when I reached out to hug her. It was subtle, so quick you might have missed it, but I didn't. Not after everything she'd given me. I saw the way she forced a smile when I asked how her day had been, how she changed the subject every time I brought up the bruises. Then there was Linda. Grandma had insisted on hiring a caregiver after her doctor recommended it. I agreed it made sense. She needed help, and I couldn't always be there. Linda seemed nice enough at first, professional, punctual, friendly, but lately I noticed little things. The way she hovered too much when I visited, always within earshot. Her smile faded if I stayed too long. Once I caught her glaring at Grandma when she thought I wasn't looking. I brought it up to Grandma, casually asking how things were going with Linda. She said everything was fine, too quickly, too rehearsed. Her voice trembled just slightly. She picked at the edge of the tablecloth with her fingers while she spoke. That wasn't like her. My grandmother always looked people in the eye when she spoke. That night, I lay in bed replaying everything. The bruises, the flinches, the quiet stares out the window, the cold way Linda had looked at her. My chest felt tight. What if something was happening right in front of Mimi and I was doing nothing? What if she was trying to tell me without words, and I kept brushing it off because I didn't want to believe it? I remembered the way she used to fight for me when I was little. She once stood up to a school principal who said I should repeat a grade. She said if they didn't give me the support I needed, she'd take it to the school board herself. She never let anyone make me feel small or invisible. How could I do anything less for her now? That's when I knew I couldn't keep sitting on my suspicions. I couldn't wait for proof to fall into my lap. I had to take action. I had to protect the woman who gave up everything to raise me. Because if I didn't fight for her, who would I didn't expect anything on the first day? I went home after installing the camera, opened my laptop, and watched the footage like I was tuning into an old home video. Grandma sat in her chair, sipped tea, read a book, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. The next day, it was the same. Calm, mundane. I felt a little guilty for invading her privacy, like maybe I had let my imagination run too wild, but I kept watching. I told myself 1 week. 1 week, and if nothing showed up, I'd take it down. By day 4, I was drained. Staring at grainy nighttime footage, blinking through exhaustion, watching her shift in bed or get up slowly for water. No visitors, no raised voices, no signs of anything. Until that night. That one night when everything changed. It was a Thursday. I almost didn't check the files because I had a headache and an early meeting, but something told me to open it. The camera had picked up movement at 11:43 p.m. I clicked play and leaned in. My heart froze. Rick. My Uncle Rick. I hadn't seen him in years. He moved into the room like he owned it, quiet but deliberate, glancing toward the door before stepping closer to her bed. I felt my throat tighten. Grandma was awake. She looked startled, sitting up slightly. He said something I couldn't hear, and she immediately shook her head. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket up around her chest. He stepped closer, too close. He held a folder in one hand. He shoved it toward her. She pushed it away. That was when he grabbed her wrist. Hard. I saw the way her body recoiled, her eyes wide like a frightened child. I felt sick. He leaned down, yelling now. I couldn't hear his voice, but the fury in his face said everything. Her head shook slowly, her mouth moving as if she were pleading. He raised the folder again and slapped it against the side table, the papers spilling. She jumped. I did too. Then came the worst part. He grabbed both her arms and shook her. I gasped so loud I startled myself. She was crying, her face turned away, and still he kept shouting, waving something under her nose. I paused the video, my hands shaking. I stared at the still frame. His hands were around her arms. Her eyes filled with terror. That was it. That was what had caused the bruises. I had doubted her. I had doubted myself. And there it was, playing on a screen in front of me like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I pressed play again. She was refusing. Whatever he wanted her to sign, she wasn't giving in. He slammed his fist into the dresser. Then he pointed at her, his mouth twisting in anger. She looked so small, so defenseless. It was like watching someone try to crush a flower. Eventually he left, just walked out like nothing happened. I watched her curl up in bed, covering her face with both hands, his shoulders shaking. I felt hot tears running down my cheeks. My whole body trembled. I had trusted Rick once. He was the uncle who bought me ice cream when I was little, who taught me how to skip rocks. But this was evil. There was no other word for it. I sat there in silence, the screen still lit. My chest heaved. The guilt crashed over me like a wave. How long had this been going on? How many times had he come? Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Then the questions came. Why was he doing this? What was in those papers? Why did Grandma never tell me? Did she think I wouldn't believe her? Or was she just too scared? The anger rose, slowly burning through the disbelief. I backed up the footage. I watched it again. Every moment, every cruel gesture. I needed to burn it into my memory. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And then I saved it. 3 copies. Flash drive, cloud, external hard drive. I wasn't going to let this slip away. I wasn't going to let him hurt her again. I called in sick the next morning. I couldn't focus on anything but that footage. I replayed it again while I wrote down everything. Timestamps, facial expressions, the exact time he entered and exited. My stomach stayed in knots the entire time. Later that night, I sat across from Grandma at the table, looking at her hands, the fading bruises. She smiled at me like always, like nothing had happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hold her and say, I saw it, I know now, I won't let him touch you again. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to do this right. I had to build a case she couldn't talk me out of. I had to protect her, not just from Rick, but from whatever fear kept her silent. I closed my laptop and promised myself I'd get justice. She raised me to be strong. Now it was my turn to fight for her. I drove to the police station first thing the next morning. The flash drive was in my jacket pocket, and I held it like it was made of glass. My palms were sweating, and my heart wouldn't stop pounding, but I kept thinking of Grandma's face when Rick grabbed her. The officer at the desk led me to a detective named Reed, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a calm voice. I handed him the drive and explained everything, what I saw, what I suspected, how long it had been going on. He plugged it in and started watching in silence, his jaw tightening as the footage played. He paused the video at several points, scribbling notes, then looked at me and said we had a case. It was enough to trigger a formal investigation into elder abuse. Hearing those words felt like a strange kind of relief. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. Something real, something awful had been happening right in my grandmother's house. They asked if she was safe now. I said yes, but I wasn't sure. That uncertainty ate at me all day. Every sound made me jump. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected the worst. I started checking in on her 3 times a day, sometimes just driving by the house to make sure everything looked normal. I didn't tell her yet. I couldn't. She wasn't ready, and neither was I. Then came the part that shattered me all over again. I started asking quiet questions. I talked to a neighbor who'd mentioned seeing Rick's car outside sometimes late at night. I asked Linda a few casual things about schedules and medication. Her answers were polite, too polite. Mechanical, like someone repeating a script. That night, I checked the camera archives for times when I knew I wasn't there. Rick had come by 3 other times in the past month. Each visit was short aggressive, and always when Linda was working the evening shift, and she never said a word. The footage showed something even worse. One night, Rick walked straight into the house without knocking. Linda had let him in. She even offered him tea. I felt my stomach twist. She knew. She'd been helping him. Every time I thought Grandma was safe because someone was there, she wasn't. I printed stills from the footage and brought them to Detective Reed. His face darkened when he saw them. He told me they'd expand the investigation to include Linda. That broke something in me. I had trusted her. Grandma had trusted her. We paid her to keep her safe, and she opened the door to her abuser. I started to worry about what Rick would do when he found out we had gone to the police. I started sleeping with my phone next to me, ringer on loud lights half dimmed. I checked the locks twice. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps outside the window. I wasn't sure if it was real or just my nerves tearing at the edge of my sanity. But I didn't stop. I documented everything. Every conversation, every new mark on Grandma's skin, every moment that made me uneasy. I built a file so thick it barely fit in my bag. And with each new piece, I felt closer to getting her out of that nightmare. I wasn't just her granddaughter anymore. I had become her shield, her voice, her fight. And I would keep pushing no matter how scared I felt, because she had spent a lifetime protecting me. Now it was my turn. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Once Detective Reed saw the footage, things started falling into place. Within a week, Rick was brought in for questioning, and I was called in to provide a formal statement. I went to the station with every piece of evidence I had. Video files, printouts, my notes, everything. They told me to prepare for a long haul, but I could feel the shift. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was becoming real, actionable, legal. A few days later, I got the call. They had reason to believe Rick wasn't acting alone. I sat in Reed's office, gripping the sides of the chair as he explained. Rick's 2 sons, my cousins, had been visiting Grandma too. Quietly, when no one else was around. They'd fallen into deep debt, gambling business loans, something shady. Rick had been using Grandma's house as leverage. The plan was to pressure her into signing it over, sell it quickly, and disappear with the cash. My stomach dropped when I heard it. I couldn't believe they'd drag her into that. The day after that, I noticed the first strange thing. A black car idled outside my apartment for 20 minutes. No plates. The windows are too dark to see inside. It pulled away the moment I stepped out with my phone raised. Then the texts started coming. Blocked numbers. Messages like, "You should mind your own business," or "This isn't worth it." I saved them all. I told the police. They added the harassment to the case file, but I still felt exposed. My sleep became shallow. I started keeping a bat next to the bed. I checked my locks 3 times before lying down each night. Still, I didn't stop. Every time I felt the fear, I thought of Grandma curled up in that bed while Rick yelled in her face. That image burned away whatever hesitation I had left. I stayed close to her. I took over managing her meds, her appointments, and her mail. Linda was gone, replaced with a caregiver I personally vetted. I installed better locks. I added motion sensors. I created routines that didn't repeat. Anything to make her less of a target. At work, I scaled back hours. My boss understood. I told him part of the truth, just enough to keep the questions away. Most nights, I wrote detailed logs for the case. Other nights, I just sat outside her door with a coffee and a flashlight, making sure she slept safely. Then came the escalation. A brick through my apartment window at 2 a.m., wrapped in a note that said, "Stop, or you'll regret it." I stared at it for what felt like hours before calling the cops. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I wasn't stopping. If they wanted to scare me, they picked the wrong person. Detective Reed promised more patrols. He told me we were close. Surveillance on Rick's house confirmed secret meetings between him and his sons. Phone records connected them to each other during every one of Grandma's hospital visits in the last 6 months. She had fallen twice once down the stairs. I never thought it might not have been an accident. Hearing that nearly broke me. The idea that she had suffered that much, alone and confused, while they plotted around her like vultures. I drove straight to the station with every update I had. I was done being careful. I wanted charges. I wanted arrests. I wanted justice. The day the arrest warrants were issued, I was there. I watched from across the street as they pulled Rick and his sons from the house. I felt no satisfaction, just a deep, cold ache. They looked surprised. Like none of this should be happening. Like I was the traitor. The trial would take months. I knew that. But they were off the streets. They couldn't reach Grandma. That was all that mattered. I drove to her house that night and held her hands in mine. She still didn't know the full truth. Not yet. But she looked at me and said, "Thank you, sweetheart," like she already knew I had done something big. Still, the threats didn't stop. The cousin I used to play video games with as a kid sent me a message through a mutual friend, said I had no idea what I was doing. That family should stay out of legal things. I laughed when I read it. Then I cried. Then I called the detective and reported it like everything else. I was tired. All the time. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones. But I never considered quitting. Every time I thought about giving in, I'd remember how she used to sit beside me during storms, whispering, "It's just thunder, baby, I've got you." I could do the same for her now. There was a hearing scheduled for the following week. Grandma wouldn't have to testify. The video did that for her. So did the texts. So did the hospital records. So did the new bruises she didn't even know I photographed. The case was strong. The prosecutors were confident. The morning before the hearing, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I had circles under my eyes, a bruise on my shoulder from where I slammed into the doorframe while running after a strange noise. But I felt powerful, solid. I'd carried her pain, but I hadn't let it break me. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about the right to grow old without fear. It was about every person who gets silenced, ignored, and dismissed. I didn't set out to be a fighter, but once I saw the truth, I had no other choice. I'd gone looking for bruises. Instead, I uncovered a whole web of cruelty hiding in plain sight. And now I was cutting through every knot one by one until she was free. Until they were held accountable. Until it was over. It happened a few weeks after the sentencing. Grandma and I were sitting on the porch, the sun low, the air warm with that late spring stillness, when we heard a knock on the front door. I stood first, my chest already tight, because I had a feeling. It was Rick. His sons stood behind him, their shoulders slouched, eyes heavy. None of them spoke right away. They just stood there, awkward and quiet, like kids being dragged in to apologize after a fight. I didn't ask them to come in. He started with her name. Soft. Careful. Like it might break her. He said they were sorry. That they had lost themselves in desperation. That they never meant to hurt her. I didn't interrupt, but my jaw clenched tight. Grandma didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at them, her face unreadable. Then she asked why. Just one word, but it landed like thunder. Rick's eyes dropped. He said they needed money. They saw the house and panicked, that they convinced themselves she'd understand. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just said she loved them once, and they turned that love into a weapon. I felt my throat burn. I had waited for this moment, pictured it so many times, but standing there, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if asking permission. I gave a small nod. It was her choice. She turned back and said she forgave them. Not because what they did was forgivable, but because carrying hatred was heavier than she could bear. I said it too. I forgive you, but we won't forget. I told them this didn't mean we could be a family again. This was not a reunion, this was closure. A clean line between what was and what will never be again. Rick nodded slowly. His sons said thank you. They didn't cry. They didn't beg. They just walked away when we closed the door. Grandma sat back down on the porch swing, her hands trembling slightly. I sat beside her and didn't say anything for a while. She whispered that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was a way to stop bleeding from wounds no longer open. I didn't answer, but I understood. We weren't pretending it didn't happen. We were just choosing not to let it define us. In the days that followed, something in her eased. Her steps were still slow, her hands still shook, but her shoulders relaxed. She laughed a little more. The nightmares stopped. She slept through the night. As for me, I felt something loosen inside my chest. I still didn't trust them. I never would. But I didn't flinch when I heard their names. I didn't replay the footage every night. I was beginning to heal. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about who deserved it. It was about who needed peace. And we needed it. We had earned it. Not by forgetting what they did, but by surviving it. By choosing to live without letting bitterness take root. We didn't rebuild anything with them. We didn't go back to birthdays or holidays. But we moved forward. Just the two of us. And that was enough. That was everything. Life slowly began to feel normal again. The courtroom battles were over. The threats had faded, and Grandma was safe. For the first time in months, I could breathe without bracing for the worst. I returned to work part-time, easing back into stories that didn't carry the weight of my own. It felt strange at first. The world outside our home had kept moving while mine stood still. But I didn't resent it. I was grateful just to feel stillness again. That was when I met Alex. He was speaking at a conference on elder care reform. A young physician with kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush. He talked about dignity and protection like someone who understood pain without needing to dramatize it. Afterward, I introduced myself. We talked for half an hour about what had happened with Grandma. He didn't flinch or offer pity. He listened. I didn't realize how rare that had become. The next week, he asked me to coffee, and it didn't feel forced or fragile. It felt like light through a crack. We fell in love quietly. There were no fireworks or sudden declarations, just moments. Steady, sure, simple moments. A walk after dinner. His hand found mine in a crowd. He helped Grandma into her coat with the same gentleness he gave his patients. Grandma loved him instantly. She watched him like a mirror, always smiling when she saw how he looked at me. One night she pulled me aside and said, "I think your heart found someone who knows how to carry it." I held that sentence close for days. We got married in the garden behind her house. Small, filled with laughter and people who had stood by us. I wore a dress she helped me pick, and she sat front row with a tissue clutched in one hand and pride filling every inch of her. When I found out I was pregnant, I cried before the test even finished blinking. Alex wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "We're ready." And we were. We had come through fire and made it out whole. We named him Noah. Grandma said the name felt like a new beginning. The first time she held him, her whole face softened, and she whispered, "Welcome home, little one." I'd never seen her glow like that, not even in the old family photos. Our house, the one they once tried to take, filled with tiny socks and giggles and baby cries in the night. The same living room where pain once echoed, now burst with lullabies and board books and naps on soft blankets. It became our home in the truest sense. Some afternoons I'd find Grandma and Noah curled up on the couch, her telling him stories in that steady voice I'd grown up with. She would look at him like she looked at me when I was small, like the whole world was worth fighting for, just because he was in it. I often thought about how different life could have been if I had stayed silent, if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I had accepted those bruises as just another part of aging. That thought never stopped haunting me, but it also never stopped reminding me how far we had come. Alex built a garden box for Grandma out back. She planted tomatoes and basil and tiny yellow flowers she never bothered to name. She said they reminded her of joy, and when they bloomed, they did. We lived simply. We loved loudly. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened. It became part of the story, not the whole of it. We chose to grow from it, not live under its weight. Some evenings I'd step onto the porch, rocking Noah to sleep, and hear Grandma humming from the kitchen while Alex packed leftovers for tomorrow. The lights were warm. The air smelled like lavender. And I would think this is peace. Not the kind you wait for. The kind you make. The kind you protect. The kind that lasts when you fight hard enough to keep it.